and let's say 50, and now it should be 25. And here it is. So 25 is displayed correctly. And since this is so fun, let me just add another one of 120, let's say, and this one is 60%. And notice that in here is, of course, it also updated, but we did that before a couple of lectures ago, right? So all of these together are 90%. And actually, if you sum these together, so 5 plus 25 plus 60 is 90. So these percentages are correct. So with this, we concluded the percentage part of this application. And actually, our app is already fully functioning, so all of the important features that we wanted are implemented by now. There are just some minor things that are left to do here, and we're going to look at them right in the next lecture. So come with me there right now. In this lecture, we'll take care of giving the numbers that we display on the UI a proper formatting, so that they are easier to read and look better. And so in this lecture, you're going to learn how to use different string methods to manipulate strings. Easy as that. So this is the look and feel that we're trying to achieve with our numbers on the UI. And there are basically 3 rules. And the first rule is that all numbers have a decimal part with exactly 2 numbers, even if they are originally integers. So for example, this 1500 here is written as 1500.00. And that is so that all the numbers are always equally aligned. So in this case here, for example, we have minus 900.00 and 98.63. And so you see they're all aligned. Now the second rule is that all the expenses always have this minus sign here in front of them and then this space. So here as well as here, while all the income numbers are positive numbers, so they have this plus sign and also this space. And the third rule is that if a number is in the thousands, then we have this comma separator here, like in this case here, or also here. So these 3 rules is what we're going to implement now. Okay, so let's go back to our app file. And what we're going to do here is to simply add a method to the UI controller, and then each time that we display a number on the user interface, we call that method and input the number into that method, and then output the formatted number, okay? So let's add it somewhere down here, let's say here, okay? So format number, and then the input that we receive is of course the number that we want to format. And then we also need to type. So if it's an expense or an income, because remember, if it's an expense, we want to prepend the minus sign, and if it's an income, we want to add the plus sign. So we need type here as well. And actually this is not how it should be done, right? So of course here's the function. So now it's correct. So let's write our rules here. So plus or minus before the number, exactly to decimal points, and a comma separating the thousands. So let's see some examples. Imagine we have 2310.4567. So this should become plus space 2,310.46. So we're going to round this decimal part here to 46, right? Or another example, let's say we have 2000 simply, and this is going to become plus 2,00.00. Okay, so this is the formatted 2000, so this looks much nicer and is easier to read. Alright, and how are we going to do that? Now the first thing that I want to do is to calculate the absolute part of the number. So this means that, for example, if it's minus 2000, that it should be simply 2000. So I want to just work with the number and without the sign of the number, okay? So I'm saying num should be, and once again the math object, and then .abs, which stands for absolute. So the absolute simply removes the sign of the number. And here I'm going to input the number that we receive as an argument, right? And this is also where I store the result of this. And I can of course do this because, as we know, this is treated as a regular variable here in our function. So by doing this calculation here, I'm basically overriding the num argument. Alright, so the absolute number is now stored in this num variable. Now the next step is to actually take care of the number of the decimal numbers. And there is a very handy number method that we can use for that, which is called toFixed. So I can simply say num equal num.toFixed and then 2. Now this is not a method of the math object, such as the ABS method that we used before here for absolute, but instead this is a method of the number prototype. And as I mentioned earlier already, strings and numbers can also have methods, even if they are originally primitive data types. But if we attempt to use methods on them, such as we do here, so this is a primitive number, but now I'm going to use a method here, then JavaScript automatically converts them to objects, and then we can use their methods just like this. So what this does is to always put exactly 2 decimal numbers on the number on which we call the methods. And that is exactly what we want, right? So if we input this number here, it will nicely round it to this number, and if we put in a number without any decimals, then it will also add these decimals, such as we have here. And actually, let's take a look at that in the console, okay? And actually, let's go back to the original app that we were working on, right? So this one. So let's now try this. So if I wrap the number in parentheses, like let's say 2.4567, and now I can call the method toFixed and 2. So this gives me a string. And notice, this really is a string with 2 decimal numbers that we want. And it rounds it nicely because there's a 6 after the 5. So it gets rounded to 6. And now if I have just 2, for example, let's see, it's going to convert it to 2.00. So exactly the rule that we want, right? So let's go back. So after this line here, we have a string which already respects or rule with the 2 decimal numbers. And once again, I'm storing this into the num variable because I don't want this result from here anymore, so I simply override it into the same variable. Okay, and now we need to think about this comma separating the thousands. And that's going to be the trickiest part. So let's start by splitting up this number into the decimal part and the integer part. And we can do that using the split method on the string, because remember, this is now a string, and we already used the split method before actually, and so it's really easy. So let's say num split, okay, is the num.split, and the string that we're going to use to split the number in 2 will be the point. Okay, let me just declare the variable here. So var num split. So what this will do is to divide this number that we input, so num, into 2 parts. The integer part, for example 2310, and then the decimal part, which will be, in this case here, 46. And it's going to be stored in an array, right? So we can say that the integer is the num split 0, so the first element of the array, and the decimal part is num split 1, so the second part. Now I need to just declare these variables up here, int and dec. Alright, so the decimal part is already being taken care of, and now we just need to add this comma here if we have 1000. So let's do that. And we do that using an if-else statement. And remember, this int is still a string, and on a string, such as on an array, we have access to the length property. Okay, so using length on a string, it gives us, of course, the length of a string. So for example, if the string is number, then it will return 6, because number is made up of 6 characters. In this case, our string is a number, so basically it will give us how many numbers are in our number. So if we have more than 3, then it's more than 1,000, right? For example, this 2,310, it has 4. So in this case, we need to add a comma right here. Now in here, we are going to use a method called substring. And substring allows us to only take a part of a string. So this method is going to return simply the part of the string that we want. So let's say int.substring. So it's written like this, so sub_str. And then in here, the first argument is the index number where we want to start, and the second number is how many characters we want. So imagine that we write 0 and 1, then this means that we're going to start at position 0, so right in the beginning, and read 1 element. So imagine it would be this number, then this int substring would return only the 2, because we start at position 0 and read 1 number. So this would return string 2. And let me actually save it to the int variable again. So again, we're going to override what's in this variable because we don't want it anymore. We're just interested here in the result of this execution. Okay, so this gives us the first part of the number. And now we can simply add the comma and then take the last 3 parts, right? So really easy. So we can add the comma and then take another substring. So int.substring, and now we want to start at position 1 and read 3 numbers, right? So let's see, in this case, we will start at position 1 and then read 3 numbers, 1, 2, and 3. So the result of this, if the input is 2310, then the result would be 2,310. So makes sense? So this is exactly what we want, right? Well, not really, because imagine that the number would not be 2,310, but let's say 23,510. And then the output would be simply 2,3510. So comma here. So this would be the output. And that's not what we want, right? We want a comma in here, not here. So we cannot simply say that we want to read 1 here and then from 1 to 3. So these numbers are hard-coded, but we actually want to make them more dynamic. And the way we do it is to again use the length property of the string. So if we say int.length -3, then it's going to work. And let me show you why. So let's go back to this first case here with 2,310. The length would be 4 and then -3 would be 1, right? And then we would have the one that we had before. Now if the number would be this, so 23,510, then the length would be 5, and 5 minus 3 would be 2. And then the comma would be here. So this is what we need, right? And then we also need to change it here. So we already know that this is int length -3. And then we want it all the way to the end of the string, right? And the end of the string is, of course, simply the length of the string. And now this is going to work for all of the cases. So let's see with this one. So the length is 5. And if we start at 5 minus 3, we start at position 2. So 0, 1, 2, which is here. And then we read 1, 2, and 3. And so actually in here, it should not be this. It should be 3. So now it's correct. So this now works with any number that we're going to input in here. And with this, we also followed this comma rule here. Now all we have to do is to put a plus or minus sign in front of the number. So let's remove this. And we can now use the ternary operator instead of using the if statement. So let's say if the type is exp, then the sign should be minus, right? Because an expense is minus, so it's negative. So declaring the variable. And if it's not, then the sign is gonna be a plus. And that's it. And now we're ready to return our formatted string. So return type. So at first the sign, then after that we want a space, right? Then we put in the integer, which is now formatted with a comma as we did before. And then finally we put out the decimal part. So we put together all of these strings using the plus sign. And actually we can do it even better. So I'm going to show you something very interesting. So let me copy this and replace this here and put it into parentheses. So we want this to be executed first. And if I don't assign this to any variable, then this operator here is simply going to return either minus or plus. So in this place here, we will have the minus if it's an expense or a plus if it's an income. And since it's an operator, I can simply wrap it here in the parentheses, and then it's going to be executed first. All right, so we're now ready to use this. And let's first do it when we add a new item. So this is down here, up here, so here. So instead of simply passing the object value, let's pass the result of formatting this number. So we say this dot format number, because remember, this is a method on the same object, and so we're going to use the this keyword. And actually, let me think about this, because probably we're not going to use this function here outside of this module, right? So we could as well make it a private function. So let me take this out of this object that we return, which contains our public methods, and make it a private method or a private function. So I'm going to put it in here. And now I need to change some things. So var and equal and all right. So now we can remove the this part and simply say format number and then the type. And that's it. So now when we hit this, the format number function will be called with our value, and with the type will be formatted and returned, and then here replaced in our string. So this should be working now. So let's reload this and add project 1500. And here we go. So we have a small problem here. We actually forgot to add our dot. Okay, but beside that, it looks good, right? So yeah, it's up here. So yeah, it's here. So here we forgot to add the dot, but now it should be perfect. So project 1500, and here we go. So now it's nicely formatted, such as we have it in our original. And another one, this time an expense. So groceries for 97.56, let's say. And it's also nicely formatted. So now here's the minus sign and the space, and then everything looks great. So we have it here in our add item method. Now we only need to put it here where we show the budget. And that's also easy. So where is it? Display budget. Okay, so here. So we do the exact same thing here. So format number and then the number, and now we need to type. So we don't have the type here yet, do we? Because we don't know if the budget is going to be negative or positive. So let's add an if statement here, or let's simply use the ternary operator. So let's say opt.budget is greater than 0, then the type is going to be inc, and else it's going to be exp for expense. So type equal expense. So now we have the type that we can use here. Okay. So format number again. And here we know that it's always going to be positive, right? Because it's an income. And so we want inc in here. And now here, format number, and in this case it's an expense. So let's check this out. And actually we can already see that it's working because we already have this here nicely formatted. Because remember, this display budget method is already called in our init function. But let's still add something. So yeah, it's working. So let's now move on to the next thing that we have to fix here in our user interface. In this lecture, we're going to display the current month and year in our user interface as soon as we start the application. And so in this lecture, you're going to learn how to get the current date by using the date object constructor. So let's create a new method here in our UI controller called displayMonth. Okay, so we're going to use the date object constructor in order to save the current date into a new variable. So let's call it now. So variable now is a new date. So remember, with object constructors, we have to use the new keyword, such as we do with our own object constructors. And then if we simply don't pass anything into the date constructor, then it will return the date of today. We could also do it in a different way. So we could say var, for example, Christmas, and then a new date. And then we could pass into the year. So this year, for example, 2016, then the month. So for December, it's 11 because it's 0 based, and then the date. So this would return a date object with the Christmas date of this year. But that's not something so common to do. So usually we simply use it like this to store the date of today. And then we can use methods to retrieve the current year or the current month or the current day or even the minute or second in which this date object was created. So let's start with the year and create a variable called year. And let me declare them up here. So var now and year. And later also month. So remove this here. So year is now. And this object now inherits a bunch of methods from the date prototype. And the one that we're going to use here is get full year. And this is going to return, in case that it's 2016, it's going to return the year 2016. So really easy. Now all we need to do is to display this on our web page. So let's look at that to find out the class. And it's up here. So it's called budget title month. So I initially only wanted to put the month here, but now I'm going to put the month and the year. So this will be a new element in the DOM string object. So up here, and I'm calling it date label. So then going back here, so now we can use document.querySelector and DOM strings and date label. And if we now set the text content property of this to our year, it should work. So all we need to do now is to actually call this method here. And where's the best place to do that? It's of course in the init function, right? Because that's something that we want to happen right in the beginning after we start our app. So I'm going to say UI controller dot display month. Maybe I should have called it display date, but it doesn't really matter. So let's see if this works. And actually no, nothing happened here. So let's go back. And yeah, here I see the problem. So I didn't actually call this function, this method, right? So that was the problem. Okay, now we have this weird, I don't know what this is, so let me create some space here. Function get full year. So I guess I see what happened there. So the problem is that in here I also didn't call this method. So of course this is a method, so I have to call it. So now I'm sure that's gonna work. Let's see. And yeah, so 2016, the current year. If you're taking this course later, then maybe you'll see 2017. But 2016 is right now as I'm recording this. And now let's get a month here. So I'm saying month is now dot get month. So it's also really easy. So month up here, and now I simply say month plus a space and plus the year. So let's see how that looks. And yeah, so it gives me a number. So month number 8. And we already know that this is 0 based. So now we can do something very simple, which is simply an array containing all of the month names. So this is going to be called month. Okay. So let me first declare it here, month. And now let's write all of them here. So we're already halfway through. Now only 6 more left. So July, August, September, October, and now November and December. So something missing here. All right. And now what we want here, down here, is no longer the month, but the month and with the index number of month, right? And remember, this is 0 based, so number 0 will be January, and the 8 that we saw is not August, but September, because September is the month number 9, and so in a 0 based array, it's number 8. So let's check this out. So alright, available budget in September 2016. So now you also know how to use dates in JavaScript. So let's now move on together right to the next lecture. Welcome to the last lecture of this project. All that's left to do is to make some finishing touches on our app. And so we're going to polish our user interface even more in this lecture. And in this lecture, you're still going to learn something new, and that's how and when to use change events. So what we want to do in this lecture is to improve the user experience here of our input form. So right now, when we hit this select field here, then the outline of this element here is blue, right? And this one as well, and this one, and also the button is blue. So this is the blue of our income, right? Now, if we change this to minus, so to the expenses, this is still blue, right? So there's not really a difference. Now, what we want to do here is to change this to red, so to the expenses color, when we are adding an expense. So this way the user can immediately recognize if he's inputting an income or if he's inputting an expense here. So how are we going to do that? We're going to use an event that is triggered when we change this from plus to minus and from minus to plus. And that's not the click event, because we could click here and then still click on the plus and then nothing really would change, right? But there's another event that we can use, and that's the change event. And the change event occurs each time that we click here and then change it to something else. So now the change event happened. And so we can now add an event listener to this element here and then wait for the change event to happen and then handle that event. So let's now do that. So we already know that all of our event listeners are set up here in this function. So this is no exception, and so we're gonna add it also in here. So document.querySelector, and then DOM where all the strings are contained. And this one is called input type, right? So we add an event listener here. And now it's not the click event, but as I was saying, it's the change event. All right. And so now we need a callback function here. And we're going to write that callback function into our UI controller because this has something to do with manipulating the UI, right? So UI controller, and I'm going to call this method the changed type. Changed type. So now we need to go to our UI controller and add that method there. So let's do it right here. So changed type. Alright, so what is going to happen? So let's look at the interface again. So what we want to happen is these three elements here to change this outline, and then this button here to change the color. So we basically want to do some style manipulations. And do you remember the best way to do that? It is to add or to remove some CSS classes, right? And so I already wrote some CSS classes into our style sheet where they are. So this is the red and the red focus class. And we're going to use the red class for the button and the red focus class on the other three elements. So on the select element and the two input elements. So two things that we have to do. We have to select all the three elements which are going to receive this red focus class, right? And remember, it's these three, this and this. And then we need to select the button here and give it the red class. Okay, so let's do that. So for the first three, let's use the query selector all. So var fields and document.query selector all. And now we need to input the three class names separated by commas, okay? So let's actually do this in separate lines here because we have three of them. So it's DOM strings dot the input type, then plus the comma, and then DOM strings dot input description. And here we don't need any comma, of course, because the comma is here between the quotes, because we're constructing a string here, right? And DOM strings, the input value. So these three are the ones that are going to receive the red focus class. All right. So remember, this returns a node list. So in order to loop over it, we cannot use the for each method. But remember, in one of the previous lectures, we wrote a very useful function for that. And it was called here, node list for each function. So we can now make use of that again, right? All we need to do is to remove this function here from this scope, right? Because if it would be like this, we cannot use it in our other methods or functions. So I have to remove it from here because the other methods don't have access to it. And so I'm going to put it out here, out of the object. So right here after the format number function. So it's still a private function. So only the methods that are in here in this controller module can use this function. Okay. So let's go back to where we were and now use this function to loop over our selection. So node list for each, then input our fields and our callback function. So we want the current element, and the index number we don't really need because all we want to do is to add the red focus class on the current element. So cur class list, remember, and now I can put add and then the class name, so red focus. Now the problem with this is that once this change event occurs and this function here gets called, this red focus class will get added and will never again be removed because we don't have the remove method anywhere. And actually using remove would not be ideal because we have something better, which is toggle. And remember what toggle does? Basically, it adds the red focus class when it's not there, and when it's there on some element, then it removes it. And that's exactly what we want. So each time that the type changes, we want this class to change. And change in this case means that it's there or that it's not there. Okay, so this should already work. So let's check that. So now it's blue, and it's still blue. So let me click here as well, so nothing really happens. So let's open up the console. Let's see. So we have some syntax error. So let's go to line 323. 323. So it's this one here. Okay, so I have two parentheses here. So we don't need this, of course. So let's now try it again. So now we don't have a bug. And yeah, it's red now. And so now, when we click here, all of this is red, and so we instantly know that we're working with an expense here. And now if we change it back, then the change event is triggered again, and so we toggle our class. So the class is now removed, so it's now gone again. And the same thing here and here, and if I click again, then the class is toggled again, and now it's back on this element. The only small thing left to do is to now add the red class here on our button. And that's the easiest thing in the world, right? So we just need to add another line here saying document.querySelector, and we do this because it's only one element, so DOM strings, and this one is the input button. And again, we want to toggle it because of the same reasons that I explained before, and this one is called red. Okay, and that's it. So let's try it again. So everything is blue, the button is blue, and I changed to red, and now look at the button, and it turned red. So amazing, right? So let's add an expense here to see if nothing else is broken in the app now. So 500, and yeah, it works. Or dining out for 58.25, and let's add a salary, and now everything should turn blue again. And yes, so it's blue or green, whatever, and now the salary is 2,500, and yep, everything works as expected. And that's actually it, everyone. We have now finally and officially finished this beautiful application, and it has now all the features that we plan to include, and it has a really polished user interface, right? So it really looks great, and it also works great. So really, congratulations for making it this far and for really learning and understanding all of these exciting new things about JavaScript. And now just jump right into the next lecture, which is also the last one of this project, just to take a look at the final structure of our app. First of all, a huge congratulations! You have made it all the way through this app without giving up, and that's really, really amazing. I'm really happy for you right now. And I really hope that you enjoyed this project as much as I enjoyed coding it with you. So let's now look at the final structure of our app. So this is what we built throughout all these lectures, all these methods and functions sitting in different modules and calling one another. So please take some time now to look at the entire code that we wrote and then compare it with this diagram to see that this is really exactly what we did. Because, just looking at the code can be really confusing, right? But after having something like this, it all starts to make sense. So yeah, you should do that. And then, after that is done, I want you to think of ways in which you could extend this app and add even more features to it. And then, of course, I want you to implement these features as well. So not just thinking about them, but really coding them. And that will be a great way to build up your knowledge even more and to start getting some practice in a project that you're already familiar with. So that makes it a lot easier. So good luck with that, and make sure to share your progress with the community, I can't wait to see the features that you come up with.